Notice, challenge, change. And when it comes to cognitive therapy, it's the thought that counts. Hi there, my name is Thomas Brown, and I'm from Qualia Counseling Services. And this is our next installment in the free CBT series. As with our other videos, I just want to remind you that this video is really meant for self-help. If you're dealing with something in which you're feeling quite unsafe or quite overwhelmed emotionally, it might be time for you to call 911 or go to your local emergency room. If this is something that's feeling like kind of a big deal and maybe a little bit beyond your ability to handle, it might be time for you to call a place like Qualia Counseling Services or another agency in your town so that you can get the professional help that you need. If this is something that's feeling kind of like 5 out of 10 or a little bit lower, and something that you might buy a self-help book for, then this video is probably for you. It's probably right along those lines for you. So with that being said, I'd like to talk today about the second part of our Notice, Challenge, Change series, challenging, by first talking about thoughts and how those work, and then in our next video, we'll talk about how we start changing them directly. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you and get to those slides that we usually look at. And so there it is, Notice, Challenge, Change, and we'll get to the next slide that really shows us the challenge part right there, fancy pants. All right, so let's do some more thinking about thinking and learn a little bit more about thoughts and the nature of our thoughts. So really, thoughts are whizzing through our minds all day long, constantly. We're constantly kind of taking in information, making sense of it, trying to figure it out, and then responding to it in some way. And thoughts or cognitions come in a lot of different forms. And let's just look at a couple of them here. There's just a few. So they might come in the forms of phrases. I'm doing well. This sucks. No one likes me. Those might be phrases that we're quite aware of going through our minds. They also might come in the form of images or memories. Some of us are quite visual people. I am, for example, and I might have an image that's like a snapshot or like a little video clip of something that might happen or a prediction that I might be making. Other images or cognitions might kind of come in the forms of body sensations or connected to what's going on in our bodies. And certainly if we have something happening in our bodies, maybe our heart rate is going quickly or we're feeling tired, we might have thoughts or interpretations about that as well. And as I mentioned previously, sometimes our cognitions or our thoughts come in the forms of memories. Other ways to think about them would be intuitions or hunches, maybe a gut impulse or something like that. Cognitions and thoughts come in a lot of different forms. And they really do happen so fast that in a lot of ways, and a lot of times, we don't even pay attention to them. And we'll get into why this is a good thing, but it's also important to really take note of that we might have a thought that's faster than the snap of my fingers, and then more thoughts might come cascading from that and piling on top of that. And that one little thought might lead to a whole lot of other stuff that's going on in our lives. In our brains, those neurons that we've got, those brain cells, or we call them neurons, a simple way to think about it is that neurons that fire together wire together. So if we are kind of thinking similar thoughts in similar situations over and over again, those neurons are going to fire together and wire together and make neural networks or pathways. I've got this image of these kind of wires, or maybe you can almost even imagine them as like cables or networks or things like that happen in our brains when we think things certain ways and we do things over and over again. These structures are actually built in our brains. The thing about our thoughts is that they really do impact how we feel and what we do. We've gone over that in earlier videos. The way we think about something or interpret a situation leads to our emotions and our behaviors and our physical responses. As I've mentioned already, we don't often think about them very much. We don't pay attention to them. Our thoughts are just whizzing around all the time. We're responding, and we don't often take time to just slow down and pay attention to our thoughts and start wondering about them at all. They're also very believable. Why wouldn't we believe our thoughts? They're going through our minds all the time. And sometimes it's quite an interesting idea for us to think that maybe our thoughts aren't 100% true. Maybe our thoughts are not all that helpful. Maybe we need to question our thoughts or even question our brains sometimes. It kind of makes us feel a little bit differently about what's going on up there for us. And as I've said already, we don't often examine our thoughts. We don't take the time to look at them. So kind of building on all of this, we have these thoughts going on all the time. we're making meaning and they're whizzing around and doing what they're doing, and we're not pausing to really think about whether or not they're useful. And that's what cognitive therapy is so great about. We take the time to slow down and really start pondering about these things. And so let's be clear, our thoughts, for the most part, the vast majority of time, things are really quite good about our thoughts. Our brain likes to think things quickly. Our brain is really good at being efficient. And so having our thoughts kind of make these neural networks and fire together and wire together and whiz around in our brain is really a good thing. Imagine if you had to think really hard and focus and concentrate to back your car out of your parking spot every single day. That would take a lot of time, and it would get really kind of cumbersome to have to go through every single step bit by bit and focus so hard to get your car out of your parking spot every day. Our brains over time, and because they fire together and wire together, we can do that fairly quickly and without having to think too hard about it because of this nature. And so that's a good thing. And that happens in a lot of situations in our lives. But that being said, there are times when our thoughts can get kind of stuck in the negative, and that those same kind of patterns, those same networks can get formed in negative ways. So one situation might kind of activate the whole pattern of negative thinking down a certain direction or in a certain path. And this happens so much that we call these things cognitive distortions or unhelpful thinking styles. And I'd like to take just a little bit of time to talk about that. So these are patterns that are habitual and are generally unhelpful. So just where we can have neural networks, neural pathways, good things that help us, we can also have kind of neural networks and pathways, cognitive habits that are not as helpful for us. And that get us into a little bit of trouble. We get stuck in them. Like I said, every time we might think about going to a party, we think, oh, it's going to suck. No one's going to talk to me. And so then anytime a social situation comes up, if we think about that same habitual way, we're going to get really stuck in that thinking pattern. And you can imagine what kind of behaviors and emotions we'd have as a result of that. These unhelpful thinking styles are also really common. We all get stuck in one or two of them quite often. And so we can kind of normalize that and say, all right, I'm thinking this way. I'm just like a lot of other people. But we also have to start examining them to make some changes and to challenge them a little bit. And as I said, they're so common that we actually have lists of them. You can go online, and if you Google cognitive distortions or unhelpful thinking patterns, or sometimes we call them thought traps, you'll be able to find quite a few lists and quite a few tools that are out there, or any kind of CBT self-help book that you find would have a list of cognitive distortions in them. The thing is, we're going to get to look at them shortly here, but just let's talk a little bit about why are they so believable? Because they really are, until we start examining them, they really are quite believable. Well, again, they're thoughts, and remember what we talked about, we don't pay a lot of attention to them. And so they go into our brain, we think in this way, maybe we've done this for a long time, maybe we haven't thought about any alternative, and so they're believable to us. And again, because they're in our heads, unless we're being invited to think about them, like through CBT, why wouldn't we believe them? That's what's going on up there. And the other reason why they're kind of believable is they might take a little bit of truth and kind of blow it out of proportion or distort it. I'm sure that you can think about mirrors at a fun house, the house of mirrors where they kind of distort our images and make us look funny. Or you could even think about those various filters on our phones where you put your face in front of it and everything's all twisted out of proportion, or our mouths are really huge. That's a good way to kind of think about our cognitive distortions, is that they take our face or something that is kind of true, but it gets kind of all out of whack. It just focuses on one little part of it and gets it out of whack. And that's the same kind of thing as what a cognitive distortion does. So there I've got my bullet point about distorted mirrors in a funhouse, or the app on our phones. So what are some of these? Let's take a look. So things like all or nothing thinking. And if we are stuck in all or nothing thinking, it's going to use words like always or never. I always fail at this, or no one ever talks to me, that kind of stuff. Overgeneralizing is fairly similar to all or nothing thinking. I kind of think about it as painting all of one thing with the same paintbrush. So everybody sucks, or all of this type of person is this particular way, or I never go there, that kind of stuff. One really common one, especially for anxiety, is catastrophizing. So taking one little thought, I might not do well on this test, and then it blows up to getting worse and worse and worse. I might not do well on this test, which means I'll fail this course, which means I'm going to fail school, which means I'm not going to get into university, and then all of a sudden we're unemployed and homeless and destitute and terribly unhappy. That's called catastrophizing. It kind of blows up and gets worse and worse. And another really common one is shoulds. And we can expand that to sort of using ought or must. Anytime we're putting a lot of pressure on ourselves, I should do this, or you should do this, or children should do this, that might be kind of a time when we have to take a step back and be a little bit careful. So when we notice that we're thinking in an extreme, unhelpful, or distorted way, we can kind of take a big sigh of relief because we know that it's distorted and it's generally unhelpful and only based on a tiny little bit of truth. So when I'm working with my clients in my office, if we discover that there's an unhelpful thinking style or a cognitive distortion at play in our thinking, we can go, thank goodness I don't have to think that. I can think of something new. I can think of something different. And I've already gone over this, it's not helpful. So we can think of something else. So that is the nature of thoughts. And really quickly, of course, we've taken a look at what thoughts are, how they whiz through our minds. We've taken a look at the idea that neurons that fire together, wire together in both positive and negative ways. And that we can get stuck in negative patterns that can be listed out, like some of these examples that I've just talked about. I've got more examples on the free handout that's also on our website here. So one thing that you might want to try in related to this video, maybe a little bit of homework, would be to continue to pay attention or notice your thoughts this week, but then to see if your thoughts, maybe you pick one or two, fit into one of these unhelpful thinking styles. You might want to see whether you can kind of pull it apart or challenge it a little bit by asking yourself some questions. Is there one type of unhelpful thinking style that I use most often? We all have kind of our go-tos. I know I'm an overgeneralizer and a black and white thinker. I kind of get stuck in that one. But other people might be more about catastrophizing or using shoulds a lot, or some of the other cognitive distortions that are out there. You might also want to think about, is there a way that I can challenge this? Is there a way that I could be a little bit more balanced or a little bit more fair? And then kind of think it even further, what might that thought be if it was more balanced and fair? So again, today we're talking about this challenge part in our Notice, Challenge, Change trilogy. And we've talked about thoughts today. And in the next video, we're going to get a little bit more concrete about how we challenge our thoughts. Thanks a lot. I look forward to talking to you again soon.